What is up? Welcome in. It's another edition of 10,000 Pitches, a podcast devoted to everything Minnesota soccer and beyond. I am Jeremy Rushing here for episode 145, and alongside me, as always, partner in crime, fellow contributor to SodaSoccer.com, Mr. Dominic Jose Bisogno. Dom, how we doing?
Doing well. Had a very busy week with the day job and got some fun features put together, soccer related features. That was fun. Had a really crazy, UPSL week as well. That was fun to track and write about. So yeah, just looking forward to recapping some stuff here and talking about the international games as well.
All not to be outdone by the massive piece of furniture that you put together today at your house.
Yes. Also made a couch with my bare hands. So another cool thing that happened this week. So
I don't know if it's the dust in the air, but I can't laugh without coughing. Like I don't laugh anymore. I just like cough in place of laughing. I'm not sure what's going on.
It's that Canadian smoke.
Yeah, exactly. Seriously. I don't know. Something. But yeah, proud of you, Dom. You put together a couch and you're recording an episode of 10,000 Pitches. I mean, who could ask for a better day?
It's a real 1-2 right there.
Yeah, really is. Really is. All right. Well, we are presented by SodaSoccer.com. It is your home for soccer coverage in the North. Check us out, SOTAsoccer.com. Subscribe to the podcast, rate and review the podcast if you could. Subscribe to the Loons daily newsletter. It is in the show notes. The link is below. If you would like to do that, daily Loons content in your email inbox. You can also follow us at SodaSOC on all the socials. Also, if you would be so inclined to directly support our work, directly support what we're doing, our coverage, you can check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/SodaSoccer. You can contribute for as low as $3 a month. Those $5 and $10 per month tiers, they'll get you the bonus content that we put out at patreon.com/SodaSoccer. It's, Minnesota United training notes and quotes. It's training audio. It's kind of some match day threads and exclusive things there. So make sure you're checking us out and enjoying that. Again, patreon.com/SodaSoccer. Still 5 patrons away from our June goal. 9 more days in the month as we're recording, 7 more days in the month if you're listening to this on Friday. So be a friend, tell a friend, and help us out. Again, patreon.com/SodaSoccer. All right, let's jump into this. No Minnesota United results to speak of this week, but still plenty of news. Plenty of off-the-field news, some good, some bad, some international stuff. So we're going to jump right into this. The biggest news of the week, at least on the training ground for Minnesota United, is that we actually got to speak to Emmanuel Reynoso as media members for the first time since he returned, since he rejoined the club in early May. Obviously, he's made a couple appearances since. He's kind of accomplished all the goals that you would think he needed to accomplish in that time. He's had a players-only meeting with the team where he explained himself. He's kind of re-ingratiated himself with the fan base. Did the video statement, which I thought was a really good touch. He's made a couple, he stepped onto the field at Allianz Field to a massive roar of 19,000 plus fans. So, he's done everything he needed to do, but it's still it still felt a little bit incomplete without the opportunity for us to actually talk to him and ask him questions, maybe gather some additional context on his situation that maybe he wouldn't have previously just offered up without being asked the question, right? Which you totally understand from his perspective and from our perspective as well. There were a couple things I want to note from this. So kind of the first question was obviously, what were kind of those reasons? Can you provide any context to the family issues that you referenced as the main reason that you were still in Argentina all this time? And he said a lot of the issues actually surrounded his 4-year-old daughter. Now, he didn't go into whether that was health issues, whether that was potential immigration issues with her, maybe joining him and his family joining him, coming to the States, whether that, I'm not sure exactly what those issues were, but they did surround his 4-year-old daughter, which anybody who is a father and who has children knows that is obviously always your number one priority. So cannot fault him there. So it was good to get some context from him there. And he also said that he was doing some training in Argentina before he came to Minnesota. He was doing some casual soccer stuff, but he said once he found out that he was going to be coming to Minnesota, that all the family issues that were keeping him there were solved, and he knew he'd be coming back, he really started to ramp up his fitness training and kind of training down there before he actually made the trip up to Minnesota, which I think if you look at the timeline and look how soon he was able to get himself back on the field, especially compared to the initial timelines that were given in terms of reintegrating with the group, but also getting himself back to proper fitness. It makes sense that he was able to sort of get the ball rolling while still in Argentina and kind of get a head start when he was here, by the time he was here in the States. So those were the two biggest things to me, the context surrounding the family issues and obviously him kind of getting a head start on his training before he actually got on the plane to Minnesota. Dominic, anything here stand out to you, or anything from this conversation or from the quotes that have been released from the conversation that stood out to you at all, or you want to address?
I mean, I guess I would just say on the first note that he mentioned that his daughter was a factor in the situation. I think that probably would explain to some degree the lack of detail that is being presented to us. Obviously, and I think that would be understandable. If the situation has to do with any sort of personal details about particularly a child who's a minor, that's understandable that parties involved would not want to overly share with the public. So that there's some element of that's good to know, I think. Just not more details, but just that is one of the factors at play. As far as the him prepping beforehand and all that, I think that's something that once he's been playing, we've all kind of thought like, oh, okay, well, he actually looks quite ready for this. And I think that knowing that and having him sort of confirm that he was doing his best, particularly in the later stage of the situation, to prep for his return, I think that helps reinforce the idea that he did have the intention, desire to return.
Yep.
If a player is being dragged back to his club to play, and it's one thing if he's pretending in a video to want to be back, but if he's actually been training and prepping for it physically, that implies that he genuinely wants to be doing this. And so I think that does help a little bit reinforce that whatever was happening, that he had a genuine interest in returning to playing and to the club. So yeah, I mean, I think that those details do maybe put a couple question marks to bed. I think this situation is kind of one that already most people have moved on from, just in the sense that, he's back, he's doing his thing. There's a season to focus on, but I do think there's probably a couple question marks that are a little more timid now with those details.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that he kept going back to and kept reiterating in this during this press conference or media availability, whatever you want to call it, is that this is the result he wanted. He wanted to be back in Minnesota. He wanted to end up back with this team. This is where he wants to be. He wants to be playing for Minnesota United. And that was something he mentioned numerous times during the 15-20 minutes that we were able to talk to him, is that he's happy here. He's happy to be here. He's happy to be back with the club. This is the goal that he wanted. This is the end that he wanted to this whole saga, was to be back in Minnesota with the team ready to go. So it's good that, he was able to achieve that goal. And it's good that all the issues and hurdles that he presumably was, facing during that time, those were all able to get solved, and he's able to, make his way back. And obviously now we've seen the impact that he can make during his cameos, and Adrian Heath said it is, he didn't rule out the possibility of Reynoso being in the starting 11 on Saturday against RSL, which I think would be a huge, just continued progression in his fitness and in his readiness and in his potential impact for the club. If he's able to start and play 60 plus minutes, obviously that's something that Minnesota, they need his playmaking on the field. There are only 3 teams in MLS that have fewer goals at this point in the season than Minnesota United. So they need goals. They need people who can create goals. They need people who can create quality chances. Obviously, Amanda Reynoso fits all of those, descriptions. So we'll see if he's able to get in the 11 on Saturday, but Heath did not rule out the the possibility.
Yeah, I mean, obviously at the end of the day, there's always going to be day of sort of decisions that have to be made with the 11. But I think, we have seen in his cameos in these last couple of games, and then actually, the last game was really about a full half a game, not so much a cameo. We've seen Emmanuel Reynoso make a pretty big impact when it comes to the game. So if he does start, I think that completely makes sense. This is a player that's showing that he can have an impact. If he doesn't and he continues for another game or two to play the role he's been playing, I think that's also understandable given he's working his way back into the team and all those sorts of things. But yeah, I think either way, at the very least, we would expect to see him playing in the game to some form and certainly having the impacts that he's been having in the previous couple matches.
Absolutely. So another piece of off the field news and kind of international news as well. And this, unfortunately, not on the positive note here. Michael Boxall, reportedly on the receiving end of a racial slur during New Zealand's friendly with Qatar on a Monday. Boxall is he's a multiracial man. He has Samoan heritage as well. There's conflicting statements from both federations after this. The New Zealand Soccer Federation obviously stands with the players in their decision to not come out after halftime, after there was no punishment doled out or anything addressed by the officials during the match in response to this reported racial abuse that happened. And on the Qatar side, they're actually saying they're giving the no, they started it angle here, where they're saying it was actually New Zealand players who were giving the racial abuse, and it was Qatar who was on the receiving end. So, conflicting statements. Obviously, we're not going to go into this, too deep here, but it's unfortunate that we keep seeing these incidents play out, and obviously hits a little bit closer to home when it's a Minnesota United player who is reportedly on the receiving end of this. And when you watch, the only thing I will say any further on this is that when you watch the video, and I believe we've retweeted and quote tweeted the video individually and on the Soda Soccer account, there is a moment in that it was after a foul, and there is a moment where you see every New Zealand player just go red at the exact same time and reach a next level of intensity and anger and upsetness all at the same time. So obviously something was heard, something was said that they did not like and saw as something that was very serious. We don't know what was said. We maybe probably won't or shouldn't know what sure. exactly was said in that situation, but just a really unfortunate circumstance, again, in a year that's been sort of plagued by this across soccer as a whole, both at the club and the international level. And, even more unfortunate that, for us locally, it's one of our own, Minnesota United player who's on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate situation. And I think just two sort of pieces of all that to reiterate or add my 2 cents to is, first of all, I think some of the confusion, this is actually an event that's gotten, reactions from a lot of people outside of the, Minnesota soccer space, of course, people in the New Zealand soccer scene, people in the Qatari and greater Middle East soccer scene. You've seen responses and interactions about this event from all these different people. And I do think one detail that has perhaps been miscommunicated is I think there's some people who might not know who Michael Boxall is, who think this is a story about a black player, because the Qatari player is a Qatari national, but he is of African heritage, racially abusing a white player. And Michael Boxall, of course, and as are many other of the New Zealand national team players, Michael Boxall has Samoan heritage. Obviously, many of the other players have Maori heritage, other indigenous Pacific Islander cultures as well. So I think that's the angle that presumably this was aimed at. That would be my assumption. And like you said, you watch the video, and there's a argument, a very basic, during game argument, and then suddenly people seem much angrier, and it certainly indicates that something happened. Now, who knows, what the intention was? Who knows what the significant, who knows the details of it? Obviously, the Qatari Football Federation are under the impression something else happened, but clearly, whatever did happen was enough to deeply anger the New Zealand squad, and that has to mean something. So,
Yeah.
very, very unfortunate. Very unfortunate to see happen. In a game that was just supposed to be a routine friendly for these two teams to practice. So yeah, obviously, thoughts of support with Michael Boxall and those players for this situation, having to deal with it, and hopefully some reasonable conclusion can be reached by the two federations as they sort of figure their way out of this one. But yeah, very, very unfortunate. Whatever the details, very unfortunate for anything like this to happen at a game.
Also should be noted, Qatar is competing in the Gold Cup, and their first match is on Sunday. So there is that as well. But yeah, to echo your point, Dom, obviously all of our well wishes and our thoughts and our hearts are with Boxy during this time. Can't be easy for him. And one of the things that did make me smirk a little bit in watching the video is the New Zealand announcer who said he said something to Michael Boxall, and I would not recommend doing that. And that's 100% true. I remember being, I think I was, fifth or sixth row in the U.S. Open Cup match against Philly. I wasn't covering. I had the night off, but I brought my daughter to the game. And when Kai Wagner kicks the ball into Boxall's face while he was laying down, I thought for sure that Michael Boxall was going to kill Kai Wagner on the field. That is a man. He is a gentle giant. You do not want to mess with him. He's very intense on the pitch, but then you see him in the Allianz Field elevators with his daughters, and he cannot be a nicer, more gentle human being. So, but yeah, he's Adrian Heath said he's called him a consummate professional, and in any interaction I've had with him, have found that to be 100% the case. And obviously, just sending all of our best to him as he makes his way back to Minnesota. Actually, should be back in Minnesota already, and he said this week that he'll be available Saturday against RSL. Internationals who will not be available Saturday against RSL, though, Dane St. Clair and Joseph Rosales. They will miss at least the game Saturday and July 1st versus Portland, as they are set to compete in the Gold Cup group stage. If Canada and or Honduras advance, then they will be out for more games moving forward into July. The Loons play the 1st, the 8th, the 12th, and the 16th, and then they are off for the Leagues Cup. So that's something to note, that depending on how things go for Honduras and Canada, they could be without one or both of those key figures moving forward. Dom, I want to get your thought on this, because this has been a conversation that I've been thinking of. And actually, Jacob Schneider asked Adrian Heath about this during media availability on Tuesday. Dane St. Clair has been the backup goalkeeper for Canada, and basically his entire time with the Federation. For some reason, Borjan is still the starting goalkeeper, even though he probably won't be. He definitely won't be in 2026. Canada doesn't play until Monday, yet they are keeping St. Clair through, keeping him away from the club for Saturday's game against RSL, when presumably St. Clair is not even going to start and probably not even play on Monday for Canada.
Yeah.
What is your thought on this? Because there are some players, especially with the midweek games this week, that are participating in Gold Cup and international competitions, and they were actually back playing with their clubs this week before making their way back with their international teams for the Gold Cup. It just seems a little. I do understand it, but at the same time, from a selfish Minnesota United perspective, it's kind of like, come on, you can't give us this one. Like, you can't bring him back for just this one game, and then he can rejoin the team before Monday. I think.
So here's the thing for me, starting on just that note of some national team players coming back midweek to play with their teams before they go back for the Gold Cup. That practice in total is a little odd and bizarre,
Mhm.
That's not a normal thing for our national team to do, to let a guy go back for a couple days and then come back for prepping for a game. So in that sense, I mean, the fact that it's happening at all, I think is odd.
Mhm.
So I mean, whether Dane St. Clair is included on the list or not, I guess the whole thing's odd. So I don't know about that. I mean, I obviously the elephant in the room on this is right. The fact that, as you pointed out, he's almost certainly not going to play. I guess the
Mhm.
problem, I would say, for Canadian national team, rather, trying to uh, give Minnesota United some sort of benefit because of that, is they can't go moving different players around in unique ways in the camp like that. I mean,
Mhm.
they if they're going to have people there, they have to have everybody there.
Yep.
Even if he's the backup goalkeeper, if the night before Borjan gets the flu and they let St. Clair go to Minnesota and he gets hurt in a game, like they
Mhm.
can't be playing pieces all over the place like that.
Yep.
That's not particularly responsible from their point of view, from their priority, which is the national team. That would not be smart in my opinion. Now, obviously, as has been the case for many international breaks now, as you said, Dane St. Clair leaves, can't play for Minnesota United, and he doesn't play for Canada, and that's very frustrating from a Minnesota United perspective because to some extent you go, well, I mean, what's the point of him
Mhm.
leaving if he's not going to play, and now he's not playing for anybody? I mean, I guess that's sort of the random, unlucky roll the dice you get when your starting goalkeeper is the backup goalkeeper for a country. I
Yep.
don't know if there's anything Canada can do about that. I'm sure the backup goalkeepers for every other national team, some of which are starters for their clubs,
Mhm.
probably cause similar problems for those clubs because of
Yep.
that dynamic and because of the nature of the position, of course, with one player being able to play it. So I don't know. It's one of those. To be clear, I find this as frustrating as everybody else. I think it's super frustrating that this is the situation Minnesota United find themselves in every international break. But at the same time, I don't think there's a way to solve it
Yeah.
other than Dane St. Clair just becoming the starting goalkeeper
Which
eventually.
I mean, it's
So
kind of also selfishly, but also like just from a general perspective, like if you're trying to put yourself in the best position to compete for Copa America in 2024, for the World Cup in 2026, don't you want the keeper that's presumably going to be between the posts for those tournaments getting
yeah,
reps now? Like, don't you want to put
yeah.
him
No,
in
I mean that
like
makes sense to me.
now? Yeah.
That makes sense to me, but I don't know why they haven't. I mean, to be honest, I mean, with all due respect to Borjan, who of course is a very experienced, very decorated player, uh, playing him in front of any of their other options is a bit strange to do right now because I
Yep.
mean, even if it's not St. Clair, you have other options that are younger who
Mhm.
presumably would be more available in 2026. So that as a total strategy is confusing to me. But I don't know. That is the decision they've made. I suppose he was so crucial in that World Cup qualifying campaign, and I guess they just think that he's worth keeping in there.
Mhm.
I don't quite understand it either. I think putting a development piece in, whether it's St. Clair or somebody else, would make more sense. Uh, Clearly, that's not how they feel. So, I mean, we'll see.
Mhm.
Maybe the Gold Cup arrives and St. Clair is playing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously, he didn't play in the Nations League games, but those games were also in the run up to a trophy, and so maybe that just adjusts
Mhm.
that decision making. I don't know. So yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one. It's a frustrating one for Minnesota United fans, and I completely empathize with that. At the same time, I think at the end of the day, Canada is going to do what makes sense for them as a national team. I don't necessarily blame them for that. Unfortunately, it just happens to really, really be inconvenient for the club, and I'm just not sure there's a solution to that right now.
Yeah, and just one final. I'm not saying that Dave St. Clair should be starting for Canada in the Gold Cup final this year. Like, I'm not necessarily
Sure.
saying that, but like, in the World Cup this last year, the Canada's third group stage game meant nothing. Like, they were not getting through.
Right.
Why not start Dane St. Clair? Give
Right.
him a World Cup matchup experience if he's going to be your starter potentially in the next World Cup. Friendlies he's not played in at times. They were in the Nations League third, or no, they were in the final. But I mean, they're the Nations League. I mean, it means something, but it also kind of doesn't. Like, wouldn't you maybe want to try to give him a run out there? Gold Cup group stage, maybe try him out and try him in one game. That's kind of all I'm saying here. I'm not saying you should
Sure.
be playing in the most high leverage match possible for Canada at this point, because I mean, obviously Borjan has kind of earned that spot in terms of his tenure and what he has done during this great run that Canada has been on and this rise that they have been on. But I think you also need to start looking to the future if you're Canada. And obviously St. Clair is a big part of that. But anyways, we will digress and move on from that. Still not sure if Bangahukli Klangwane is going to be in this COSAFA Cup for South Africa. Talked to a couple people at Minnesota United. They said probably, but still we're not able to give a 100% assurity on whether or not he's going to be in this. And that kicks off July 5th for South Africa. So depending on how early, if he is competing for South Africa in that tournament, depending on how early he would need to get there, maybe he would miss July 1st for the Timbers. He's going to be back for this weekend for sure, no matter what, for the RSL match. But he could miss the Portland match, through the rest of July, depending on this COSAFA Cup situation. So more to come there. And then unfortunately, but fortunately for Minnesota United, this is like the biggest. I was very torn on this watching Zarek Valentin in Puerto Rico the other night in the Gold Cup play-in, basically, if you want to call it that. As Puerto Rico were one win away from qualifying for the group stage of the Gold Cup, but they fell 2-0 to Martinique on Tuesday evening. And I was kind of caught between two feelings of like, this would be really cool for Zarek, and this would be, obviously I want him to be happy because he's a really good guy and everybody loves him. But also, Minnesota as it stands is pretty thin at fullback right now until Bakai Dabasi is fully reintegrated. So maybe it would be best for the club if Valentin was available for the RSL match. But either way, it sounds like he's going to be back and ready as Puerto Rico lost. But still, just an interesting dichotomy of feelings heading into that one for Loons fans, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely a player that you'll, from a Minnesota United perspective, that you'll be happy to have in your ranks roster available for these games. He's a guy that can really put a shift in. He obviously isn't starting every game currently, but very skilled, very experienced. So that's a big addition for Minnesota. From the Puerto Rican side of things, yeah, unfortunate that they don't make the Gold Cup, just in the sense that was the potential for a historic run. It would have been their first Gold Cup ever, Gold Cup proper. Obviously, taking part in qualifiers before, but so that's unfortunate. But that's the way it is. And congratulations to Martinique. Also, shout out to St. Kitts and Nevis, who did make the Gold Cup, and I believe it's their first ever Gold Cup.
First time.
So there are going to be some debutantes in this Gold Cup, but not Puerto Rico. With Klangwane, we'll have to see how that goes. For what it's worth, definitely a shout out to South Africa, who I believe locked in a spot in AFCON during this last break. So I believe he played as a substitute in that game. So big win for them. That's a national team that's had a lot of highs and lows over the last 10 so years. Obviously, going back to the World Cup they hosted. So glad to see that they're having some good times there, and that Klangwane gets to be a part of that. But obviously, it would be also great if he's available as much as possible for Minnesota United.
Definitely, and they're against RSL this weekend. At RSL, you're going to need all hands on deck. You're going to need to be, at your best, because RSL is an interesting case, because I was doing some research on them today, and I did not realize. So they have given up the most goals in the Western Conference, not goals per match, because they played one more than Austin FC has. Austin FC has given up 27 goals. RSL has given up 28 goals. But as total goals, they've given up the most goals in the Western Conference, 28 through 18 matches. But they're seventh in the table right now. They're still firmly in playoff positioning. And that is a lot due to their attack. They have 3 different players who have scored 4 goals this season. Damir Kreilach, Jefferson Savarino, Pablo Ruiz, each with 4 goals. Savarino has been a real star for them. As has Ruiz and Kreilach. For being honest, all 3 of them have had really good really big breakout seasons for them, in helping them get to this point, helping them sort of counteract the fact that they are very leaky from a defensive perspective, but they have a lot of firepower in attack. And when you're talking about a Minnesota United defense, you're without Kamar Lawrence, Michael Boxall is going to be back, but he's coming off international duty. You're going to be without a good depth defensive midfield option in Joseph Rosales. Kervin Arriaga is returning from an injury. He should be available for Saturday, but who knows what his availability is going to be, and how much he's going to be able to play, if at all. You're going to need to be really defensively sound against this RSL attack. And you're going to need to take your chances from an attacking standpoint if you're Minnesota. I mean, that pretty much sounds like every single game that we have previewed for Minnesota United so far. But what do you think of this RSL team and how Minnesota United matches up?
Yeah, it's interesting. They're a team that I think definitely surprised people just sort of every week. Like for example, last week they went to DC United, and I think on the last episode I mentioned that it seemed like DC United would be a good pick for that one. Of course, I didn't know that 25 minutes in they were going to get a red card. but this is an RSL team that's going places and scoring goals from their own half. I mean, like, they're just kind of doing crazy things right now, and they're getting the most out of. They're getting special moments out of every player. Really, I know tonight I think they just beat St. Louis on the road 3-1. So they're getting bid results kind of everywhere they need one. And yeah, they got a lot of players that are really stepping up. You mentioned Jefferson Savarino is a player that's actually doing so well right now for RSL that there are clubs in Brazil that want to bring him back.
Yep.
So he's been on the sort of a thin thread of potentially leaving this summer. So it's an interesting team to sort of predict how a game will go against them, because that they can give up goals. That that's possible. But you also know that anybody that is playing them is also in threat of doing the same. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Minnesota's recent form has been very patchy, and that does lead you to think this might not be a great time for Minnesota United to be playing RSL. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it does feel a little bit like the writing starts to get etched on the wall that this could potentially be a rough night for Minnesota, considering the players they will be missing as well. RSL, will be affected by that, but they won't necessarily be affected by it the same way. Some of their players that were gone for the international break will be back by this game and won't be playing in the Gold Cup, for example. They're not North Americans. So, it does feel like this is going to be one where Minnesota's going to have to be pretty careful if they want to get away with a point or anything more than that.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to have to be a pretty cohesive performance from this team. And if Amanda Reynoso starts, I mean, he's going to have to be the Amanda Reynoso that can be that chance creator, that can be that huge impact player. Because just like, I know RSL's leaky at the back and they give up goals, but without Ray on the field, it's not clear where those goals are coming from right now and how they're generated and how they're going to be able to put the ball in the back of the net. So, but either way, Saturday's coming. It's, I believe it is an 8:30 p.m. Central Time kickoff for Minnesota and RSL because it's Mountain Time. So, and that will be on MLS Season Pass, and we will have post Loons following that one as well on Saturday. So make sure you stick around and subscribe to the YouTube channel and all that good stuff for that. All right, we have come to the time of the show, Dom, where we need to shout out one of our great sponsors, one of our great partners here. And this week, we're going to shout out our friends over at, not Better Edge, we're going to shout them out later, Pentz Homes. Wait your turn, Better Edge. You will be shouted out later on in the show. But Pentz Homes is who we're shouting out this week. Nate Pentz, big Minnesota United fan, big supporter of Minnesota soccer. They sponsor the Autograph Alley for Minnesota Aurora games, which is pretty cool. They've lent their sponsorship to Minneapolis City in the past as well. And they're supporting us here at Soda Soccer. So not only are they supporting the soccer on the field, they're supporting the coverage of Minnesota soccer here at sodasoccer.com. And above all that, Pentz Homes, very, very good at what they do, which is help people buy and sell homes and make them very, very happy as a result. Do me a favor. If you're listening to this, either do this right now or make a note to do this later after you listen to the episode. Just Google Pentz Homes, Pentz Homes, and look at the reviews. You will see what the experience is like there, because people are very happy when they work with Pentz Homes to either buy or sell or what have you. 4.8 star rating on Google has Pentz Homes. So you know that you're getting a high quality experience if you are in the market to buy a home, sell your home, do both. That process can be stressful. Nate and his team do a great job of taking as much of that stress off your shoulders as humanly possible and helping guide you through that process. So if that sounds good, hit them up, pentzhomes.com, Pentz homes.com, or email Nate directly. If I have sold you here, email Nate, Nate, at pentzhomes.com. Make sure you let them know that Jeremy and Dom from 10K and Soda Soccer sent you there. Lower league time, Dom. MNUFC 2 is where we start. 2-0 win over Vancouver Whitecaps 2. Big to get a clean sheet for the Loons here after, I believe, back-to-back matches where they gave up 4 goals apiece to Portland and Toronto, I believe, were the 2 matches. I may be mistaken there, but either way, it was back-to-back games where they gave up 4 goals. They get a 2-0 win here. Emmanuel Iwe and Cameron Lacey put the ball in the back of the net for MNUFC 2. Alex Smear gets his first start for the Twos after being on loan for the early part of the season. And he saves a PK, keeps a clean sheet, and sends the fans at the National Sports Center home happy with the 2-0 win. Big to try to get this train back rolling in the right direction for MNUFC 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Big save, big game from Alex Smear. MLS All-Star, Alex Smear.
Yes, correct. Goalie Wars champion.
Goalie Warrior champion. It's of course it's always great to see Emmanuel Iwe getting the goals. Great to see Cameron Lacey continuing a really good start with the team. Yeah, like you said, those 2 losses, Portland, and I believe the second one was Houston. Those big losses, unfortunately, those do happen, especially at this level. It's very unpredictable. It's good to see the team recover, get the clean sheet, get the win. I think it's a good moment to recalibrate, refocus. Obviously, we'll have to see whether or not it translates to a longer term run, but definitely good to see the team able to respond to tough defeats. Again, just good to see local players like Emmanuel Iwe. Roy O'Driscoll's have been having a very good year as well, his debut year with the team. Getting those minutes, getting those opportunities, getting that development, bringing that talent, or rather keeping their talents in Minnesota and giving back to Minnesota on the field like that is great to see. So, yeah, I mean, it's a nice change for the positive, I think, for Minnesota United too.
And the biggest story of all to come out of this is Cameron Dunbar bleached his hair. And it was one thing to see it in the photos of them in the UC2 match, but then to see him on the training pitch on Tuesday in Blaine, I mean, it glistened in the late morning sun there in Blaine. So we'll see if that starts the trend. Remember a couple of years ago, there were like half the team bleached their hair. We asked Ray about that in the media availability. He said maybe, not yet, but maybe. He will do that as well. So we'll see if that becomes a trend and starts flowing through the locker room. No pun intended. But anyways, MNUFC 2, hopefully getting things back on the right track for Cameron Knowles Club. Down to the lower league, though, the amateur, the semi-professional scene here in Minnesota. Aurora beat Bavarians 5-1. And then just going final as we are recording here, they down RKC Third Coast 8-1 on Wednesday here as we're recording. So back-to-back wins, a big week. Not keeping the clean sheets every single game like they were. I believe it was 19-0 is what they started the season at, but still pretty dominant in the Heartland division are Aurora right now. And they are, I believe, at the time of recording here, 10 points ahead of second place with 4 games remaining. Big win, though, for Rochester down south a little bit here. They get their first win of the season, first win of their USLW league history. 1-0 on the road to Chicago City, who, as we just mentioned, are second place in the division. So to go on the road and get a 1-0 win over the team that's in second place in the division, that's a big moment, a big milestone for Rochester, and we'll have to see if that carries them the rest of the way moving forward. But obviously the other storyline is Minnesota Aurora just continues to be extremely, extremely dominant at the top.
Yeah, I think just starting on the Rochester front, I think pretty early in the season it became clear that this team wasn't necessarily going to take the league by storm, and that it was going to be an up and down season. But I think getting that first win wherever it comes in the season is always a big goal when you're joining a new league, especially when you're trying to make the jump up to a higher level like USLW league. So I think for them that's a really great moment, at least to add to the journey, a good sign that they're moving towards something. And funny enough, it's a result that sort of helps Minnesota Aurora. Not that Aurora needed the help that much, but it helps speed up the process a little bit for Minnesota Aurora, who, like you said, have just continued to dominate every game, scoring lots of goals, conceding a couple, but scoring enough that those conceded goals don't necessarily leave too much of a mark. And I as we're recording, I think mathematically still they haven't technically clinched first, but looking very, very likely to do so. So yeah, it's been a remarkable season for them. And I think it's fair to say that now people can probably start getting ready to be excited about what this team will probably do in the playoffs if they clinch that spot, which I have a feeling they will. So yeah, really great season continues for Aurora, and yeah, I mean, congratulations to Rochester for getting that sort of over that first big hump of their season.
Should also know this is actually the second game where Aurora went down 1-0 in the first half. Bavarians scored, I believe, in the second minute of their match on Saturday before Aurora rattled off 5 unanswered. RKC Third Coast scored the opener in the 27th minute in this one on Wednesday. And obviously Aurora roared back and scored those 8 goals to make things 8-1. But I mean, that's something you can't really simulate in practice or in training, is facing adversity and how you come back from that. And a lot of the times when you see a team in any sport where they're so dominant over the regular season and they get to the playoffs, so they get to a point where it's time to make all of that success worth it, somehow they falter because they haven't necessarily faced that same adversity that they're going to face in the playoffs during the regular season. Not saying that they want to go down 1-0 in games, but I do think that it helps the players get in the mindset of, okay, we're not just going to come in, go up 4-0 in the first 30 minutes, and this game's going to be over before we even break a sweat. To go down 1-0 twice in a row and come back the way they have and respond the way they have, I do think it's at some level a good practice of that mentality that you need to compete in the playoffs when inevitably you're going to be facing some adversity on the scoreline, probably.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, especially when you're dealing with, of course, players on the younger side of the spectrum, I think, watching what a player is like when they're playing down a goal, I think is make or break is a little harsh, but I think is very much tells you the kind of player that I think is very defining when you can see what a player plays like when they're down a goal, especially when they're used to playing on a team that wins a lot. And so, yeah, to see, while it's not necessarily ideal for these other teams to be scoring the first goals in these games, to see Minnesota Aurora concede those goals and then pretty quickly transition to multi-goal wins on the day, I think is a reflection that, this is a group of players that do understand mentally how to play down a goal, which, to your point, is going to be a major asset when they get to the playoffs, and presumably are going to play teams that are going to be at a higher level than some of the teams in their division right now. So, yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a promising sort of detail to keep in mind as they head into the postseason.
All right, USL League 2 getting down to the end of their regular season. Playoff race starting to shake out there. St. Croix Legends beat Rochester and Mpls City in 3 days. So they are sort of in that playoff picture in the Deep North Division. Manitoba does sit top of the division after a shock win at RKC, and they have yet to lose a game. So the top 2, I believe, are still Manitoba and RKC. The only Minnesota team that's really in that playoff positioning right now is St. Croix, because Thunder Bay is the other team that's in the playoff picture, I believe, in the Deep North, if I'm correct. So, but I mean, kudos to St. Croix, just continuing that sort of in-state they've really had the upper hand when it comes to those in-state matchups this season. They seem to really be that premier Minnesota team, at least in the division right now this season, and they're keeping that going. It would be really cool to see at least one team from Minnesota make the playoffs in the Deep North Division, especially after St. Croix and Mpls City did not make it in their debut seasons last year. It'd be cool to see one team get in there and see what they can do against some of those top dogs in a playoff setting. But just a big week for the Legends, nonetheless. It can't be overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a set of statements. I think to I believe they played Rochester at home and then played at City to get 2 wins out of those games and to sort of assert themselves a little bit in terms of at least the picture in Minnesota. I think that's a big statement. It keeps them within arm's reach of those top spots. I think they're a couple points behind Manitoba, and Manitoba have a game in hand, but they're very much within reach of that first, second place spots. So yeah, I think that's a great turnout for them. At the very least, they are certainly growing and improving on their debut season a little more in the race than they were last year for sure. So I think it's a really good show for them. They got a couple games left to try and make things interesting. Manitoba themselves doing a good job of that, keeping things interesting, kind of flipping the script with RKC, who in a matter of days lost to both Canadian teams at home, which is kind of a shocker, but suddenly sort of tips that table upside down a little bit, opens the door for Manitoba Thunder Bay to enter the picture more. But yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting finish to that USLW 2 Deep North season. A couple teams really amping things up towards the end, and it's nice to see at least a certain amount of Minnesotan participant in that participation rather in that. So yeah, I think people should definitely keep an eye on those games for the rest of the season. There's going to be some really interesting ones. And by the way, Rochester, Mpls City with plenty of time to at the very least influence those races, whether or not they compete for those playoff spots. At the very least, they're certainly going to have some interesting games to affect that race. Rochester, to some extent, still in arm's reach of those spots, although a little more difficult reach than St. Croix. Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting ends. There's like 4 or 5 games, I think, left for most teams now. Going to be a really interesting conclusion, I think, to this regular season.
Absolutely. And speaking of interesting, the way the playoff spots are going to shake out in the NPSL North is getting interesting. Duluth FC, of course, no surprise, the first team to clinch their way into the playoff bracket with a 6-1 win over Twin Stars, another dominant victory for Duluth. Their 7th win in 7 NPSL North games. Eris get their 2nd win of the season, 1-0 over Joy. Twin Stars and Joy, after these losses, currently fighting for that 4th playoff spot. And obviously, Med City and Dakota are there in the 2 and 3 spots currently. Dakota in 2nd, Med City in 3rd in the table. But I mean, Duluth, it's only a matter of time before they clinch that number 1 seed after clinching the playoff spot. But 2, 3, and 4 still getting pretty interesting, especially that fight for 4th between Joy and Twin Stars.
Yeah, absolutely. So there were games tonight. Unfortunately, we're recording, kind of at a time where the games are all ending. I know Duluth beat Sioux Falls 1-0 tonight. That does mean that the only team that can mathematically catch up to Duluth now is the Fusion, I believe.
Okay.
Med City, though, won tonight. They beat Eris tonight. And yeah, very much looking confident at the very least to grab one of those spots. But yeah, that 4th place battle is kind of interesting. For a while, Twin Stars started well, and then all of a sudden Joy, who actually beat the Twin Stars a couple weeks back, they kind of leapt into that for a while. But right now that pack's pretty tight. I believe Twin Stars are in 4th with 10 points, Joy 9, and actually Eris was 6. Eris mathematically not out of that race, believe it or not, for that 4th spot. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting last couple of games, particularly in concerning that. Who's going to grab that last spot? Because look, whoever gets that 4th spot is going to have the difficult task of probably having to play on the road to Duluth. But that being said, the reason those playoffs are there is because who knows? Maybe the team that gets that figures out a game plan. They study the film. They figure out a way to get the job done. And maybe we see something a little different. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see who can grab that spot, who can get themselves at least one playoff game to work with, if not more. But yeah, obviously Duluth, continuing to look really good, look pretty set to get that 1st place spot, maybe 2nd, but probably 1st place. I think it sets up a very interesting playoff picture. Also, particularly, I think actually for second and third place, which might end up being the Fusion and Med City, who drew. I think they've only played each other once, I think, so far this season. They drew 1-1, just in the sense that, that becomes a big ticket. Whoever wins that game gets in the final. And just like I said, again, it's like, hey, if you come with a good game plan, maybe you beat Duluth and suddenly you win the whole thing. Med City lost to Duluth this season, but it was a 1-0 loss. It was a tight game. So if it's them, for example, that make that game, maybe something interesting happens. It's one of those things where obviously the regular season has gone quite Duluth's way, but I think particularly because the playoffs setup is different this year, it does introduce at least an interesting storyline for all these teams going into the end of the season, just in terms of who can get one or two chances to maybe flip the table a little bit, get that final game, maybe against maybe Duluth, and see if they can flip the script a little bit. But yeah, it's been really fun watching the action so far and checking especially that fourth place battle.
And in the WPSL, Minnesota Thunder now sit alone at the top with 16 points, 5-1-0 record on the season. Salvo currently in the best position to catch up with 11 points and a game in hand. In the UPSL, Minneapolis City clinched the top spot in the league. They also get the UPSL Midwest West 1 Minnesota Super Cup spot. So even though they're, a regular season championship doesn't necessarily guarantee anything from a UPSL perspective, because they still have to win the conference tournament to officially win the conference. That Super Cup spot was decided by regular season standing. So still very meaningful for the Futures to qualify for the 2024 Super Cup and, clinch that top spot. And I believe they will get the hosting, duties there for that conference tournament, which is big for them to play that at Ador Nelson. But, big for them. This was pretty tight all season long. You had Superior City at the top at the beginning. It was kind of a 4-horse race the entire time with Superior, St. Croix, Valora, Minneapolis City. But it is the Futures that clinched that top spot. Superior City do upset Valora 2-1 to clinch their own playoff spot in their debut season. So congrats to them as well. And then you have Valora and St. Croix that are just kind of sitting there still, hoping and that they can get in and get one of those top 4 spots and give themselves an opportunity to move forward.
Yeah, it's a really interesting last sort of 2 weeks in the UPSL. First of all, with the Futures, obviously getting that number 1 seed bid deal puts them in a really good position for the playoffs. I did want to, in the notes, we noted the MN Super Cup thing. I thought it was important to note, and I actually had like a Twitter conversation with Minnesota Super Cup just to clarify this, because I was actually slightly unaware of this detail, that the only UPSL automatic qualification spot for the Nets Super Cup is for the points winner for the regular season. Mm-hmm. So whoever wins the playoff tournament that follows to win the conference from a sort of broader UPSL perspective does not get in. It's the team that gets the regular season. My understanding is it's the same way for the other leagues as well. Where it's about regular season points rather than playoff finishes. So that's a really nice grab for them. It does mean, by the way, that there's a solid chance that it will be the Futures specifically that compete in the Super Cup instead of the senior Minneapolis City team next season, which is an interesting detail to see how that evolves. But yeah, they've had a phenomenal season, of course, remaining undefeated in regular season play. I mean, they've been dominating teams. They've been playing, I think it's fair to say, the best soccer in the Midwest West division week to week, showing a lot of grit in some games. They beat Superior City a couple games back in a really sort of mature, gritty win, 2-1 win at home. And on that note, Superior City, big win for them at home to Valora. Valora actually led that game at around the hour mark. Mm-hmm. Superior City got a late comeback, goals from their veterans, funny enough, Mark Farringer and Mally Lumsden, both former Duluth FC forwards, getting goals in I think the 75th and the 88th sort of minutes to flip the script on that one, and they get a playoff spot confirmed. So big congrats to them. Obviously in their debut year, they started very well. Middle of the season, things got a little rough, some tough results, but they recovered in time to get that playoff spot. And this is a team, Superior City, that in preseason very much talked about wanting to compete for everything. And of course, in the preseason at the same time, you saw, for example, there was a UPSL, I believe it was like a coaches poll for where teams would finish, and most people kind of had them being mid-table. They very much, have at the very least proven that part wrong, in the sense that they will be competing for the UPSL Midwest West title. So yeah, congrats to them. A lot of work they've put in, and it's going to be really interesting to see. St. Croix have also clinched. It's going to be interesting to see them, all their goals in the playoffs, and of course tonight Valora and the St. Paul Blackhawks were playing for that other spot, that fourth spot. So going to be really interesting finals. Some really good, high performing teams. And it's going to be really fun, I think, to see all these teams match up.
One note on Valora. So they were supposed to play their Super Cup match against St. Croix this past week. I can't remember if it was going to be Monday, Tuesday, but that got rescheduled to July 17th. And that match will actually decide who from that group advances as the second team in that group to the knockout stage. Valora can advance with a win or a draw. St. Croix need a win in order to advance. So that's going to be interesting there too, to see how those teams prioritize that, especially if they are both in potential playoff scenarios in their own respective leagues as well. UPSL Division One. This is not something that we have talked about. Aside from teams being announced, local teams being announced as competing in Division One, but in terms of what's been happening over the season, it's been pretty exciting. So our friends at Bateau, our friends at Bateau FC in Eau Claire, they're locked in a very tight battle at the top of the table with Minneapolis's 1826 Academy. Bateau lead by 1 point, but 1826 do have a game in hand. The clubs are also set to face off June 25th in what could be sort of a winner-take-all there for that regular season championship. Anything else on UPSL Division One you want to mention, Dom?
Yeah, just that. Yeah, there's been a lot of interesting teams playing in Division One this year. Obviously, it's a new thing from Minnesota and Wisconsin with Bateau. So yeah, it's been really fun. 1826 have been really impressive. I know a lot of people sort of in the space have been really impressed by them and their players. They got a lot of really talented young guys on that team. Bateau have done a very good job of sort of coming up, being patient through the season, and now these last couple of games they've kind of taken a jump, and now they're in first. But yeah, a lot of really fun stuff going on in Division One that we haven't talked a lot about, but there's been a lot of great stuff from Bateau, 1826, Skills FC, Granite City have their second team in there, Leon FC. You got a lot of fun teams playing down there. So Rochester FC actually have a second team still playing there. So yeah, it's been really fun. It's going to be really interesting to see who plays, or excuse me, who finishes top of that sort of battle. And the other thing that's sort of just worth that question mark, that's worth sort of sending back to the sky on this one, is just that the idea is that Division One and the Premier Division will have promotion and relegation. That is what the UPSL says that system is for. It's been unclear to me what the plan is for this season. Maplebrook finished bottom of the Premier Division. That's confirmed. So it's not clear to me if there's going to be a roadmap for whoever finishes top between Bateau and 1826 to have some sort of switch with Maplebrook or not. We'll have to kind of see what is going on there as it plays out. But I just want to throw out there that is technically part of the UPSL plan when they have Division One conferences paired with their Premier Division conferences, is to have a ladder up and down. We'll have to see whether or not they're ready to implement that yet. But at the very least, it's going to be really fun to see Bateau and 1826, competing for this title. And they've been doing a great job, both of them, so far.
When I hadn't heard that part of it, but when I saw that there was going to be a Premier Division and Division One, it almost just makes sense that there would be some sort of opportunity for somebody who wins at the Division One level to move up and play in the Premier Division, and vice versa. If you finish bottom of the Premier, drop down to Division One. So we'll have to see if that's the case. But both these teams, whether it's 1826 or Bateau, I think I would really like to see how they fare against the Valoras, the City Futures, the St. Paul Blackhawks of the world, of the area. So we shall see. UPSL women, we are at the halfway point of the season. 5 of 10 games played. Tonka Elite remain top of the conference there. Dom, any final lower league notes before we switch gears?
Oh gosh. No, I think that's about that's about it. A lot of these seasons are kind of hitting their final legs, either about halfway or further. So if you haven't kind of gone out and checked out a game yet, I definitely suggest doing it now. There's a lot of interesting ones to catch in these last couple of weeks, men and women, and especially when you have like Division One UPSL, that adds all the more to that pool. Playing all over the metro, of course, playing in Duluth and Superior and Austin, Minnesota, Worthington, all over the place now. Moorhead, Dakota Fusion. So yeah, if you haven't checked out a game yet, I mean, definitely look and check what's near you, what you're interested in, and go check a game out, because these teams definitely want your support, and it's a fun way to spend a weekend.
All right, now it's time to shout out our friends at Better Edge. We prematurely put up the banner earlier, but now it is the official time to tell you that if you go to betteredge.com/loons, BETTOR edge.com/loons, and sign up using our link, you will get a $20 basically credit to use the app and use the platform any way you want. What is Better Edge? Better Edge is a social betting platform. They are not a sports book. They do not profit off of your loss if you lose a wager that you make. When you bet on Better Edge, you are betting against other users on the platform. You're betting against your friends, or someone else who happens to be betting the same game you are. You are not betting against the house. You are not betting against Better Edge. So that is why Better Edge is free to use in 46 states, Minnesota and 46 other states. So 47 states total. But that's what makes it different than your DraftKings, your FanDuel, your whatever's. That's the Better Edge difference. So BETTOR edge.com/loons. You can bet on Major League Soccer matches. You can, once the Premier League season gets rolling again, you can bet on Premier League matches. You can bet on Champions League. You can bet on a lot of different great soccer there. And you can also enter our weekly Pick'em contest at Better Edge as well, where you can pick MLS games. And if you win, you get either bragging rights if you enter the free version, or you get a little money in your account if you enter the paid version. But either way, check it out. Betteredge.com, BETTOR edge.com/loons. $20 in your account when you sign up with that link. Minnesota, no surprise, road underdogs as they sit 10th in the West, and RSL sits 7th in the West currently. Over under is 2.5 goals. Dom, what are you feeling in this one?
I'm gonna go with the vague over 2.5 on this one. Feels like there's a couple of goals in this. Very well might be goals for Minnesota, but between these two teams, I mean, as we talked about, they both have conceded a fair bit this season. Both got some scoring threats, so I'm gonna go over 2.5.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same. I think if I were to make a prediction now on Wednesday evening as we're recording, I would probably say Emmanuel Reynoso starts. And if he starts with the quality he has shown, I can't imagine he doesn't start a sequence or be heavily involved in a sequence that leads to at least one Minnesota United goal. And we know what RSL can do in the attack as well. So I'm almost leaning 2-2 draw in this one if I were to make an actual score prediction. But either way, I do think we're going to see quite a few goals. So check them out, betteredge.com/loons. You can bet with Domerai. You can bet against Domerai. You can bet on Minnesota or RSL to win. Again, BETTOR edge.com/loons. That is $20 in your account when you use that link. Big thanks to our friends at Better Edge for supporting the show and supporting sodasoccer.com. Dom, as usual, hit us with those parting words.
Oh gosh, parting words. What I got. Oh, well, you know what? Here, what I'll say is this. This is like a very, very small plug for something else, but it's just because it's the platform to mention something. I for this coming up edition, the edition for this week for my day job at the Sun Post, I did a interview with Leo Kone from the Minnesota United Academy, and I'm in UFC too because he went to high school at one of my schools, and had a really great chat with him. And people want to check the article, that's great. But what I just want to mention here is that I had a great chat with him. He seems like a really great kid and had a really great perspective on life. And I think that it's really important. One of the reasons that I wanted to do that story, even before I had the conversation with him and found out more about him, was that I think it's really important that people give credit and respect to a lot of these young guys in these sorts of positions that are these young athletes that have a great amount of maturity, a great amount of responsibility, a great amount of respect for family and for work ethic. I think unfortunately there's a lot of negativity towards young folks in the metro or whatever, and I think it's really good to highlight people like him that are, and there's a lot of them, it's not just him, there's a lot of them that are really hardworking, dedicated young men, trying to do their best on the pitch, off the pitch. So I was struck by that in my interview with him. It wasn't necessarily something I even planned on. I was mostly just trying to get an interview because, hey, this is a guy from one of my schools that happens to be playing high level. I thought that was cool. But learned more about his story, learned more about, he's from Liberia. He actually, believe it or not, came to Minnesota when he was 13.
Wow.
Basically got here right around when his high level soccer career started. So he's been here about 5 years, and talked to him about 5 years. And that's the kind of time that can feel like a lot and nothing at the same time. And
yeah,
he's done a lot in 5 years. And so anyways, yeah, just definitely check out more about him, but just in general, I think it's really good to keep in mind as you see these young guys playing ball at whatever level, to think about, what kind of character is behind these guys when you're just judging how they play or whatever. There's a lot of really great character on and off the pitch from a lot of these young guys from Minnesota right now. I mean, Emmanuel Iwe comes to mind as another guy that every interaction I've ever had with him has been extremely positive, really class individual. And so, yeah, I didn't have that planned for the end of the podcast, but it comes to mind as something to share because it's something I've been thinking about since that article, since I wrote that article. So yeah, just maybe something to think more about as a Minnesota soccer fan, is just to think about, especially with young players, especially local players, just to think about what kind of character that person is exhibiting on and off the pitch, and what that means about them as a person, as an athlete, and maybe consider that, as you think about them as players, make sure that you're thinking about them as, community members, and family members as well. I think that's a really important part of learning about people. So that jumble is my my final thoughts for
what this reminds me of? This reminds me of that part of Anchorman when they ask him to play jazz flute on the stage, and he's like, "Oh, I was totally unprepared," as he's pulling the pieces of the flute out of his suit and putting it together. That's what that was. This is why I love doing. Hey, Dom, give us some parting words, because it's partially funny that it's just always off the cuff, and you're always you're never prepared for it, but then it always ends up being something that's super insightful and really cool. So appreciate that, and can't think of a better way to end this week's episode of 10K. Again, we'll be right back here on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're not watching on YouTube and you want to be involved in Post Loons, our post-game show, make sure you're subscribing to our YouTube channel. We will be live after Minnesota United and RSL on Saturday, probably going live around between 10:30 and 11 on Saturday after that one. So make sure you're checking us out there. And just make sure you're checking us out at sodasoccer.com all summer, all fall long for your Minnesota United and Minnesota soccer news. Till then, I'm Jeremy Rushing. He's Dominic Jose Bizonio. We will be back next Friday for another episode of 10,000 Pitches. Have a great weekend, everybody.